I'm going to show you guys how I faked this Reese bass inside of Faceplant. So before I go ahead and start the video, I just want to let you guys know that this preset is going to be available for free on my website. So if you want to go ahead and download it, you can, just so you can see what I did inside of each individual audio effect and inside of this Faceplant. So for this full sound, I'm not using any other audio effects outside of Faceplant. The only thing that I did was insert the preset into a group and assign the pitch and FX off/on to a macro knob inside of the Ableton group here. But other than that, there's really no post-processing outside of Faceplant, so everything is done within the synth. Okay, so the first thing that I started out with was the sine distortion group here. And so I pretty much used an analog generator with a sawtooth wave and then distorted it with 2 distortion effects inside of the group by quite a lot. And then I went ahead and used a bandpass filter for this group to kind of just sweep through the frequencies of the analog generator. I don't know what it is, but I really like how bandpass filters can be very resonant on a signal, and I just really like the way it sounded on the analog generator. So instead of doing like FM or even just using a plain sine wave, I think I just prefer to use a filter bandpass shape. And then for the second group, it's just my sub bass. It is just a simple sine wave, and there's also some stuff going on with the gain here, but I'll get to that in just a minute. But yeah, this subgroup is heading towards lane 2. Lane 2 is heading towards lane 3. And so for lane 1, it's kind of the same situation where it's just heading directly towards lane 3. So I wanted these 2 effect lanes to kind of just be their own and be sent directly to lane 3. And so the interesting thing about this preset is that I didn't really use the traditional phase cancellation respace method. Instead, I just used volume automation with this LFO. And for the pitch macro knob, one of these macros is actually just controlling the rate of how fast this LFO is going, and this LFO is controlling the volume of the envelope outputs for our first group and our second group. I'm gonna go ahead and turn the FX off. And so yeah, the pitch is just controlling the speed, and that's pretty much how I faked the Reese bass. And then for the FX off/on macro knob, I'm just using a remap to control this snap heap over here inside our FX on/off group. And so it's just pretty much like a switch. And inside of the snap heap is a convolver set to a 100% mix and a high pass filter. I also went ahead and set the gain to around like -12. So yeah, it adds a little bit of a nice reverb to our signal. And I also wanted to put the effects before the OTT effect, just so I could bring the reverb on the effect out more. For our FX group, I just added a shaper, and as you can see, there's just a whole lot of distortion going on. So for the shaper, I turned the drive all the way up in the mix at 100%. That's pretty much what I was doing the majority of the time while I was making this preset. So yeah, I pretty much just wanted to distort the heck out of the signal and add harmonics. Just gives it more of a gritty sound. And then I add 2 filters over here. So I'm doing like a high pass growl effect with this first filter, and then with the second filter, I added a notch, just so there's a little bit more movement. And then I added a delay and turned it down by quite a bit. And I also have the mix at 100%. So without it, it sounds like this, which honestly sounds pretty good by itself, but with the delay, it kind of adds this metal sound that I really like, just because the signal is being played so close together. And then I compressed the signal, so the threshold's at -10, the ratio is at 2. I set the makeup to 23%, and that's pretty much all I did inside of this compressor. Then I went ahead and added a gain effects to do some gain reduction for this first FX lane group, just because before, when I played the signal back while making the sound, it was pretty loud, and you couldn't really hear the sub bass. So I went ahead and added this gain. And then this cut group is just pretty much a high pass filter set at 250 Hertz. I added 2 of these just to make sure the highs of the signal wasn't interfering with the sub bass. And so yeah, this first FX lane is pretty much for our first group here. And then for our sub group, I sent that to lane 2. And inside of this sub processing group, I added a distortion and a filter. And so this distortion, I turned the drive all the way up and set the mix to 50%. And then for the filter, I set that to around 200 Hertz and did a low pass filter with a slope at 2. And so it sounds like this. And then for lane 3, our final processing for our sound, I added a shaper, turned the drive to around 5 and the mix at 100%. Then I added another gain to do more gain reduction, so I set it to around -20. Then I added a dynamics to compress the signal. I'm just going to skip over the FX on and off since I already explained that part. And then I added a final mix, and I just did some mixing in here with a slice EQ. So I got a high pass at around 25 Hertz. I did a dip at around 247 Hertz. And then I went ahead and boosted the highs. And then for this OTT effect, it's a little bit interesting what I did in here. I didn't use the multipass OTT effect. I kind of wanted to process it a different way. And so as I was designing the sound, I kind of just went ahead and listened to each frequency band and mix accordingly to how I wanted it to sound. And so I'm doing upwards compression on the highs at around 3000 Hertz, and then from 200 to 3000 Hertz I'm doing downwards compression at -30 decibels with the high threshold. And I have a bit of a slower release for this just because the frequencies in this frequency band here were a little bit more resonant, so I just wanted to bring the signal closer together. And then for the bass, I also went ahead and compressed that with a dynamics, added a slower release, and the high threshold is at I think -28 here. Then the ratio is at 2. And then for the outgain, I set it to 6. And then I also went ahead and added a filter inside of the subgroup and set the cutoff to around 30 Hertz just to get a bit of a cleaner sub bass mix here. And then all together it sounds like this. Oh, I also forgot to mention that I also went ahead and duplicated this multipass. They're kind of the same, except for the second multipass that I duplicated. All the settings are the same for the dynamics and the filter and whatnot. The only thing I did different was add a distortion, turn the drive to around 15, and then I turned the mix to around 10%. Oh, and also for the second multipass OTT, I turned the mix to 45%, and the first multipass is set to 100%. And so without, it sounds like this. And then with sounds like this. And then the last thing that I went ahead and added was a limiter. And for the end gain, I set it to 5 decibels, just because when it's back at 0, I still had quite a bit of headroom to play around with, so I went ahead and boosted it by 5 decibels. Then the last thing that I went ahead and did here was added a glide, set it to 50, and then the polyphony I set it to 1, so that way the notes aren't overlapping with each other. And so yeah, that is the phase plant preset. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Adios.